We are so lucky to have great institutions training our pre-K teachers in North Carolina. I'm really excited to have with me today Ellen Peisner-Feinburg. Ellen, talk to us about the quality of teachers in pre-K. Why is that important?
Well, Anita, thank you for having me. And that is actually something that is one of the very most critical aspects of pre-K programs. Having a high quality, well-trained teacher, someone who has a background in early childhood education, who has the right kinds of qualifications, is something that we found through a lot of research that we've done that's been done nationally, as well as research that we've done here in North Carolina on things like the North Carolina PreK program, that it's a very important part of what contributes to having a high quality classroom and contributes to better outcomes for children.
I don't have any doubt that there's a parent watching right now who's saying 40 years ago it was, gee, we really have to have kindergarten, and now it's pre-kindergarten. When will it ever end? Tell us why pre-K is so important.
So there's a long history of research at this point showing the lasting and important benefits of early childhood education, that not only starting at kindergarten, but starting even earlier has a positive impact for children, that we find that it's important not only in the pre-K years, but even longer. We found that there's important effects in terms of things like greater educational attainment, reduced special education placement, higher earnings later on in life, less teenage pregnancy, that there have been cost-benefit analyses that have been done that show increased earnings of things like a return on investment, that is, of things like $7 to $12 for every dollar that's invested in early childhood education. So there is a lot of evidence showing that this is an important way to invest our dollars in early education.
You've already used the word quality more than once. Yes. What is a quality pre-K program?
So that's a good question, Anita. Quality is something that we look at in a lot of different ways. So certainly one thing you've mentioned is teachers. Teachers are an important component of that. Again, having teachers that have an early childhood background, as well as things like a bachelor's degree. In North Carolina, for example, that's something that we've seen an amazing increase in the North Carolina PreK program, for example. That's our state PreK program. We've seen a dramatic increase in that, in having highly qualified teachers. It's moved from about half to almost all teachers from the time the program began having those credentials that are important. That's something they've really put an emphasis on. But there's other aspects to that too.
Such as?
So for example, we look at things like having the right kinds of materials and activities in the classroom that are the things that promote children's language development, their social skills, their math skills. We look at a whole variety of things, having important and lasting relationships with teachers, children, and peers. Having lots and lots of language opportunities is a really important thing.
So I want to channel the critic for a moment who says at 4, children should be playing, not learning language arts. How do you respond to that?
So when we look at what happens in an early childhood classroom, children do learn through play, and that's actually a really important point to make. What we talk about in terms of high quality instruction in a classroom for young children, it's not what you might think about with older children, which of course is probably not what I'd say is the best model even with older children either, but it's not children sitting at desks. It's not children doing work on worksheets or looking at the board. It's children playing. It's having what we call centers, which are activity centers that have lots of different materials. It's being able to engage with different kinds of learning activities and learning materials. It's having the teacher playing a guiding and facilitating role with their learning. It's teachers reading to children. It's doing activities indoors and outdoors. So it's really doing a very active learning, but it's through play kinds of activities, but that are structured and guided by the teacher to really best promote children's development. And it's also thinking about what each child in that classroom needs. so that every single child is getting what they most need to lead to their development and bring them along so that they can really develop the skills that they need to get them where they need to go.
We've been talking generally about the value of pre-K and what happens in a pre-K classroom, but you probably know as much as anyone else in the state about the North Carolina pre-K program in particular. Could you just explain what that program is?
Absolutely. So this is a program that the state began in the 2001-2002 school year, so about 17, 18 years ago at this point. And this is the statewide pre-K program in North Carolina for serving children, particularly focusing on children who are from low-income families or have other kinds of risk factors, and really with the goal of trying to make sure that every child in North Carolina has the opportunity to have these early education experiences that will really help make sure that they're ready to succeed when they get to kindergarten. And as we've seen from the research that we've done, that I've done actually in North Carolina, as well as research that we know from other programs, that will really make sure that they're not only ready to learn when they get to kindergarten, but even has lasting effects beyond that.
So I want you to say some more about that, because you have evaluated NC PreK since its inception. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What are the outcomes?
So we've seen that children who attend the NC PreK program have positive benefits in terms of language development, literacy development, math development. We've seen those positive effects not only through the end of pre-K, but through the end of kindergarten. We've even done some studies where we've seen that, looking, for example, at their third grade reading and math assessments, children who went to NC PreK were doing better than children who hadn't gone to the pre-K program.
So one hard question for you,
Yes.
if I might. There is always some murmuring out there about the lasting effects of pre-kindergarten, and some sense that at some point everybody else catches up with the kids who had pre-kindergarten opportunities. Why are you not finding that in the NC PreK program?
So I think that's an important question, and that's actually something we've been interested in and been looking at and thinking about. And I think one of the big reasons for that is that NC PreK has had very strong standards and guidelines for the program. They have strong standards in terms of things like teacher qualifications, that teachers need to have a birth to kindergarten license. That's the teacher license that we have in North Carolina for teachers who teach in public schools. So they're really making sure that teachers have that same kind of qualification. They have standards in terms of things like wanting classrooms, or requiring classrooms actually, to have curricula that they use, approved curricula, that they need to do things like do assessments with children to see where children are on an ongoing basis, do developmental screening. They have requirements in terms of the class size and the ratios that exceed the national standards in terms of what we say are appropriate ratios and class sizes for 4-year-old classrooms. And so they've got a lot of standards and guidelines in place that really ensure that these are going to be very high quality classrooms. And we've seen in the evaluation work that we've done that they have continued to meet or exceed those kinds of standards.
Let's brag on our state for a moment, if we can. How does NC PreK, that program, rate amongst other publicly supported programs across the nation?
So one way to look at that is there's a set of standards that are out there from that are called from NIER, the National Institute for Early Education Research. And when you look at those standards, North Carolina consistently has rated very highly in terms of those standards, that they're in the top 1/3 to 1/4 of all state pre-K programs in the U.S. And so I think that's quite an accomplishment. I think,
It's worth bragging.
Yes, it is. And I think one other thing I really want to say is I think North Carolina has always been at the forefront in this country in terms of early education initiatives. I think it goes back to what we did in terms of Smart Start as one of our first birth to 5 initiatives, which began way before even the NC PreK program began, and that went on for 10 years, and then the NC PreK program began initially as More at 4, and then it became the NC PreK program, And that was really something that was one of the early statewide pre-K programs. And we were at the forefront in terms of things like our quality rating system for child care programs that began with our star-rated license. We were one of the first states in the country to have something like that. So I think we really deserve a pat on the back in terms of the efforts that we've put in for early childhood in this state.
Ellen, what's the work that remains to be done?
So I think there's always more that we can be doing. I think that we've got a really good program. I think it's had really strong and lasting effects, and that's been true from the time it's begun. But you look at it and there's always more that can be done. There's certainly areas that could be strengthened. We're always looking at what more can be done in terms of instructional practices. The program currently serves about 30,000 children, but there are over 60,000 children who meet the income requirements for the program. Some of them are being served in other kinds of programs, but there's still some children out there who are not, so there's always a need. And yet there's still children that could benefit who have even higher incomes, that the state made the decision to try to start serving the neediest children, but every child could benefit from this kind of program. So there's always more that can be done. I think the question is where the resources come from.
And then, of course, that means that you've got that much more to evaluate going forward.
And absolutely, I'd be happy to do it.
We are really lucky to have you in North Carolina and learn so much from the work that you do. Ellen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Anita.